We have about 20 minutes if anyone wants to ask me any questions about writing a book about Tom Waits.
Hey, Brian. So you're pretty wise to the wily ways of artists. I mean, it's your living, actually. But were you disappointed at any level that this guy is largely self-created, and that the kind of Beat Bukowski aesthetic that that he's so brilliant at is something that he picked up rather than, I mean, that he wasn't a rummy working at the post office job, or he didn't drive across the country 8 or 9 times. I mean, did
No.
it bother you at all, or did you just revel in it?
I reveled in it mainly for the reason that Waits took the business of self-reinvention and of creating a persona to project out into the world to an extreme that I think very few other artists have done. I mean, even Dylan. But for Waits, this was a real exercise in performance art, I think. You know, he decided he was really going to live this part 24 hours a day. You know, am I disappointed? Not the real thing. I mean, we get into the whole hoary area of authenticity. What does it matter? You know, like Waits said to me, and Dylan isn't doing an act. You know, I think anyone who gets on a stage is doing an act, and anyone who kids themselves that they are opening their souls in some pure, unmediated, transparent way is probably in danger. And he talks about ventriloquism, and you know, I think it's fascinating to me to hear from people who saw him on the LA scene, and the way he demystified the notion of the artist, the way he broke down the walls between the star and the audience, if you like, in a town which is full of people riding around in limousines, sort of saying, you know, I'm in a limousine and you're not. You know, Waits would be seen, you know, fixing his car on the sidewalk outside the Tropicana, and he was just sort of everywhere. He was not interested in being some kind of star, and I think that's really interesting for 70s Los Angeles. You know, but he wanted really to live like, you know, like a Bukowski, if you like, and as a sort of experiment, just to see, you know, where that would take him. I mean, he felt that that's what he needed to do, and I really don't think in his mind he was thinking, I hope people believe that I am this jazz bow bum, you know. But it was performance art, and I think it was a very interesting thing to be doing. So anybody who says to me, you know, aren't you bothered it was all a bit phony, and I'm like, you know, listen to the music. At the end of the day, that's all that matters. You know, we don't consume music to make value judgments on whether somebody is as real as they appear to be. You know, listen to the music. Those records are extraordinary.
Hello.
You just walked in. You can't ask her a question. You just walked in.
But I did read a book, so I think I'm entitled.
Of course you could.
So did you like Tom Waits more or less by the time you finished the book than when you started out?
I think I liked him just as much and admired and respected him just as much as I ever did. It didn't really change my gut feelings about the guy. It fleshed out the sense that I had of the man. You know, he frustrated my attempts to write his life, but I respected even that. You know, what I will say about Waits is I think he's got it absolutely right in the way he separates his life from his work. And also, you know, I understand how for him, biography is a reductive art, you know, and he would see what I was trying to do is in some way to explain, you know, what he's done and kind of put him in neat little boxes. I hope that's not what I've done. It's not my intention. I hope it opens him out, if you like. But he would, you know, he would see, I'm sure he would agree with, you know, Susan Sontag's famous essay Against Interpretation. I mean, he sees, you know, critical writing probably as, oh, I said this last night, so I'm sorry to repeat it, but the revenge of the small critical mind on the big, creative, expansive heart of the artist, you know, and I think that's probably true.
Barney, in 50 years, where do you see Waits in the pantheon of writers?
I think he will be regarded up there with Dylan and anyone else you name, you care to name. I think he, you know, the fact that he hasn't written anthems and very many he's written a couple of songs that people have turned into top 40 hits, but I think he will be, you know, he'll be held in huge esteem. You know, I think he is a major American artist. He's as great a writer as you know, as well. I'm not going to say any poets of the last century or novelists, but I think he's on that level, and I think he's attained that status, and I think people recognize him as a great American artist. You know, he's certainly transcended the role of a kind of, you know, rock performer.
I don't know if it just came out, but I just bought it. Hello.
Hello.
But someone's just, or I just bought the book of all his lyrics that you read as poetry. So clearly people do consider it to be read like that.
Yes. I think he's I think
a statement rather than a question, Barney.
His words on the printed page, or on the computer screen, or wherever you care to read them, they stand up extremely well. Yeah. You know, as do, you know, Lou Reed's or you know, name your favourite lyricist. Morrissey. I don't know.
Do you think he has any literary ambitions in this? Do you think he would ever write chronicles?
Yes. Yes, I think he might. I mean, you know, probably the reason he didn't want me or another, you know, career rock writer to write biographies, he'll either write something himself, and it'll be extremely unorthodox autobiographical text, or he will collaborate with a writer of his choice to create an extremely unorthodox biographical text, I would think, you know.
Or fiction, or a novel, because after all, a lot of those lyrics are short stories, really.
Yeah. Well, he may do. You know, he may do. He may feel. Anyway, you know, he's a very well-read guy, and you know, it was fascinating talking to people from his very early days when he was just breaking through on the San Diego circuit, and how people would say, you know, not only would he be standing outside the Heritage Club where he worked as the doorman for a while, and he would not only have, you know, Kerouac in his hands, but he'd have Kierkegaard. You know, he was reading everything he could get his hands on. He was certainly, you know, he had, both his parents were teachers, so I think he certainly respected the study of literature, and he wanted to consume, you know, writing. That's absolutely clear, and he you know, he wrote poems, and some of those lyrics were published as poems in Los Angeles magazines. So he had that dimension to his work all along.
In all the interviews you conducted, was there anybody other than Tom and Kathleen that you didn't get to that you really, really wanted to get to?
Well, the first inkling that this was going to be a bumpy road was having Keith Richards, who I'd interviewed a couple of times, say, sure, I'm happy to talk to you about working with Tom. And I thought, great, that's good. Because I'd love to hear from Keith on working on Rain Dogs and Bone Machine. Because there's such, you know, you can just imagine those two together. It's wonderfully sort of piratical combination. And then I got an email from his manager saying, you know, we probably better just run this by Tom and Kathleen. And I just thought, well, here we go. And then it came in, unfortunately, Keith. So, and I, you know, of course, my response was, why would you try and stop Keith Richards saying how great you are? Yeah. Well, that's what you're dealing with. So Keith would have been great, but more than that, people like Greg Cohen, who was his bass player for many years, and indeed his brother-in-law for a period. So some of those, Larry Taylor, and these are, so I mean, at the end of the book, as an appendix, there's emails from people sort of kind of saying, sure, I'll talk, and then squirming their way out of it. So I'm so sorry, but I got a call from their manager, and, it was hard not to take again them, It was hard not to feel pissed off, of course, but I couldn't let that affect my, I understand to some degree why they do it. It's not even about, I don't think, I don't either Tom or Kathleen think for one moment that Keith is going to say something derogatory about Waits, but it's more about just controlling the level of mystique around them. And you know what? It's a pretty smart strategy. It's worked very well for them, I think. And he says himself, the public is a wild animal. It's best not to feed them too well. So what I'm doing is feeding the general public some stuff that, but as I bring that back to the point about biography being to some degree reductive, and I think in Waits's mind, what a biographer is saying is, here comes along this hack who comes along and says, well, Waits was bullied in the playground when he was 8 years old, and that's why he wrote Kentucky Avenue. That's certainly not my approach, but in Waits's mind, it may be what he thought I would be doing.
Was there any third party that was sort of critical in his early years to his success? I mean, would it be Herb Cohen, or is there...
There were one or two sort of dissenting voices who, you never, of course you get a couple of people who are saying, I once heard him on the phone to his mother and he was like, oh, hi, Mom, I mean, that's sort of, so what, but it's funny, there's a great character called Robert Marchese who worked at the Troubadour Club, who took the Waits act with a real pinch of salt and was always ribbing him about it. And so along the way, there's certainly people who've been like, oh, come on, Tom, you're not fooling me. But 95% of the people I talked to had nothing but just glowing things to say about Waits. Even if they'd witnessed explosions of temper and things like that, everybody loves this guy, and I think in many ways he's led an exemplary sort of creative life. I think he's behaved pretty well. He's had his, I read the WikiLeaks thing. There were some wild times, but he's a good man, and he's a very bright, imaginative soul, and I think he's everyone, people really do love this guy. They're a little bit afraid of him and Kathleen. So there's that element of like, we might get kind of pushed out of the circle of trust if we say anything. So it's a shame, to me it's a shame. And fortunately there were enough people who said, you know what, I'm not going to be told, what I can say and what I can't say, as much respect as I have for them, they're not going to, they're actually not going to censor what it's a matter of public record. I have a right to talk about working with Tom and knowing him, and so, and I don't know what the fallout from that will be for them, but I'm grateful that they spoke to me.
Lee's got a question.
I can't really see who's raising
A
their hand.
lowbrow pop culture question. Can you clarify what actually happened with Fritos and when in his career that was?
The Frito-Lay lawsuit that made Waits more money at that point he'd made to date in his career, 2.6 million payout he got. So they're very litigious, which of course has made me a little uneasy through this process. But essentially, in a nutshell, the story is that literally one day he heard on the radio a sort of pastiche of his famous, bebop scatting thing, Step Right Up, and it was like, who the hell is that? Is that me? Did I do that in a kind of blackout or something? And Frito-Lay had brought in a sort of Tom Waits alike to do this sort of rewritten. I mean, it was like Step Right Up, get your Frito-Lays, And he was, he'd already made it very clear in interviews that he was appalled by artists who let their music be used to sort of hawk, products. And so, I mean, they really were messing with the wrong guy, and it took a while, a number of lawsuits, but he got his payout in the end. And it was, I know for him it wasn't about the money. It was really about, it is a great quote from him saying, Good Vibrations is one of the greatest records ever made. But it was ruined for me when it was used to promote sun-kissed orange juice, and for some time after I couldn't hear the record without thinking about sun-kissed orange juice, and I resented that, So he's with Bill Hicks on this, So, but that's basically what happened, and he's taken a number of other companies to court, as I'm sure you know. He doesn't let it lie. Rachel.
Barney, last night you had talked about a little bit about his humor, and it seems like there were so many instances in his life, with his parents split when he was 10 and et cetera, that there are all these dark moments. But then you mentioned that he was a very funny in-person interview, and I just wondered if you could give a couple anecdotes or things that you found from him. I mean, he's so incredibly intelligent that it would have to come out in his creativity, with his songs.
Sure. I would only. I was sort of racking my brain to think of particular thing. I mean, what I would say is I think that, whatever else it is, Night Hawks at the Diner, 1975, is one of the funniest, records I've ever heard in my life. It's hysterical, the whole routine about masturbation, for example, is excruciatingly funny and touching, and kind of, he did create this sort of sad sack character, that sat at the piano and mumbled away, and I mean, the comic timing on that record is phenomenal. I think he could have been a stand-up guy and done it very, very well. He has a sense of the absurd that's delightful. And an interview with him is, he'll just pull your leg over and over again, just tell the most ridiculous stories. But you have to be on your guard, because every so often he'll drop in something that's very candid and very personal and poignant, actually. But you've got to be paying attention.
So describe the dynamic between him and his wife, because he was like floating around a little bit, didn't quite have it together, he was about to go totally down and she rescued him. Is that codependency? Is she the Yoko in the scenario? How do you give us the National Enquirer scoop on it, please?
I wish I could. Kathleen Brennan is the great kind of enigma, because she's never done an interview to my knowledge. She's a very shadowy presence. She's 12 years younger than him. She was a script girl at Zoetrope. They met when Waits was writing the wonderful music for Coppola's not very good film One from the Heart, in my opinion. I think music is the best thing about it. And they met, and he fell in love instantly with her. And over the years they have formed an extraordinary creative partnership. Exactly what her role is in the songwriting, I'm not sure we'll ever know for sure. But there's no doubt that he was, he felt like he was going nowhere. By the end of the 70s, he was in bad shape. He was drinking alcoholically, and was in some despair, actually. Broke up with Ricky Lee. Felt like he was at the dead end creatively, and I don't feel that way about the music, but I understand why he did. He knew that he needed to break out of the role that he created for himself. So I think what happened in that early 80s period. Kathleen came into his life and encouraged him to cut himself loose of all the attachments that had been in his life up to that point. The producer, the manager, the label, everyone went. And that is quite Yoko-esque, you could argue. It's like I don't want anyone around who was there before me. We're going to start all over again. But there's no doubt, however you look at that, and there were a lot of people who were very hurt. Why Tom just stopped talking to me overnight and never spoke to me again, and I don't know why. And that's but music is full of that. Dylan's done that all his life, and Neil Young's done that all his life. That's how that's how geniuses work. Something happened. He will say that Kathleen turned him on to all this music he didn't know about before. It's hard to believe, frankly, because he was, the idea that Kathleen turned him on to Captain Beefheart beggars belief. I'm not buying that, because he was signed by Herb Cohen, who managed Captain Beefheart for many years. The idea that he had never listened to Captain Beefheart is quite extraordinary. And last, I'll just throw this in, because I did a reading in the City, and Gary Lucas, one-time member of the Magic Band, was kind enough to play some Waits songs, so he was part of it. And as always happens when you finish the book and it's finally out there, someone comes up to you and says, "I've got this incredible story," that, and you think, God. So he was telling me about Beefheart and Waits, and it was fascinating. I didn't know this stuff. That Beefheart, naturally heard things like 16 Shells from a 30-06, which is on. Which is a very Beefheart-esque track on this. There's also Gin Soaked Boy, which is again kind of Howlin' Wolf via Beefheart. And according to Gary, Gary claims he heard Beefheart saying, who is this guy? Got some fucking nerve, And if I see him, I'm going to pin him against the wall and ask him who the hell he thinks he is, ripping me off, And I'd often wondered whether Beefheart had any views, So
Frito-Lay.
Yes, exactly. Yes, that would be ironic, wouldn't it? That would be ironic. Yes, a vocal impersonation of
I can
me.
imagine Charles Bukowski saying exactly the same thing.
Sure. Well, to pick up on the earlier point about Robert Marchese, and I had this is like second or third hand that Jack Nietzsche allegedly overheard Bukowski saying about Waits, that guy doesn't have an original bone in his body. It's a mean thing to say. Of course, it's not true. And all great artists, well, that famous quote, talent borrows and genius steals, for anyone to suggest that Tom Waits is nothing more than, the theft of Captain Beefheart and Charles Bukowski, it's absurd. The man's, emotional palette, the range of what he does musically and sonically and emotionally is vast, He's done extraordinary work in so many different veins, if you like. So, but still, it's a good quote. The idea. You can imagine Bukowski saying it, of course. Cantankerous old sod that he was.
I think maybe we'll move to the other room, and if you have questions for Barney, he'll sign an autograph. Books? Yes.
For sure. Yes, I'd like to, autograph as many books as I possibly can tonight. I've got an itchy wrist, so please, I'll see you out there. Thank you.